The following is the first of a series of 2 articles by Boris Kazmann, agricultural engineer, who has made a thorough study of the colonization problems in Palestine. His plan for the colonization of Palestine, as outlined in these articles, will be submitted for consideration of the delegates to the Kazmann Congress. The problems facing the Zionist organization with regard to the colonization of Palestine suffered a tremendous change with the achievement of the new political status of Zionism created by the San Remo decision. The methods which were considered proper under the old status must be overhauled and reconsidered. Under the Turkish regime, colonization was of necessity limited to what practically consisted of slow economic infiltration, and plans for colonization answered in scope and conception to this situation. With the new dispensation, such a policy would be entirely out of place. There is only one policy worthy of consideration at a time like this, and that is a policy of mass colonization. But to mass colonization, the methods adopted under the old dispensation would be inapplicable. Not only the old scope, but the old methods must be rejected. The historic opportunity calls for colonization on a scale hitherto unattempted, and the material problems of colonization must be envisaged in a newer, larger spirit. Shortcomings of the old methods. Hitherto, there has not existed what might be called a national conception of colonization, either from the point of view of the Yishuv or of the diaspora. There was no large and general plan answering in spirit and scope to the double task of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine and of satisfying the great nationalist impulse of Jewry throughout the world at large. The problem of Palestine was not approached from the point of view of the building up of a Jewish country. There was no study of proportions, of the relative needs of a country in the process of creation. There was no inventory of the individuals, trades, and professions called for in the progressive growth of a country as a whole. The individual colonizer came to Palestine haphazard, bringing with him his individual plans, capacities, and hopes, unrelated to the general situation or to a general plan. He bought land or developed industry at random, and even from his own individual point of view was either ignorant of or indifferent to matters which should have been primarily considered. There was no classification of land with reference to its peculiar agricultural value. There was no study of industry with reference to the relative need of its various branches. No one kept in sight the growth of a Yishuv as such. The only plan, if such it may be called, was for the incidental growth of the Yishuv through the unrelated settlement of many individuals. No study was ever made of the relation of Jewish production to local Jewish consumption. Such a study was, in fact, considered unnecessary, for the basis of nearly all colonization in Palestine was the possibility of export. The first colonies set themselves the 2 equally tremendous tasks of opening up a new country and of entering with its products world markets for which there was already fierce competition amongst industries firmly established in old countries. And these markets, even when the colonies did succeed in penetrating to them, proved to be unreliable and irregular. As an instance, the wine industry may be taken. The wine industry was for a long time considered the basis of colonization. Obviously, the wine would not be for the consumption of Palestine, but for sale in the world market. Unfortunately, the grapes grown by the pioneers could not be sold to the wine seller above a certain price, for the wine market was already well supplied, and the new wine had to find a place amongst wines already firmly established. The low price paid by the vintners did not suffice to meet the expenses of the vine growers, and the wine industry had to a large extent to be abandoned. To the labor, time, and capital thus lost must be added the additional expense of uprooting the vines and recultivating the soil for some fresh product. Within the country itself, the uncertainty of the market produced equally unfortunate results. Artisans of all kinds came to Palestine without knowing whether their particular form of labor was in demand. The result for them, as is well known, was semi-starvation, followed by a retreat from Palestine. There was no market to receive these people, no organized community to absorb them. These evils were inherent in the system of colonization and increased as colonization proceeded, so that an attempt at mass colonization under this system, or rather lack of system, would automatically defeat itself. Since there was no planned relation between production in the Yishuv and consumption by the Yishuv, the arrival of new consumers was not followed by an increase of production to meet their needs. In other words, the arrival of new colonists disturbed the existing equilibrium in the country from the point of view of consumption. Individuals competing in increasing numbers for the purchase of the necessaries of life brought about speculation by the seller and a rise in prices. There has thus been created in Palestine the usual class of speculator in land, foodstuffs, building material, etc., whose victim is naturally the incoming colonizer. As colonization is carried on or becomes more probable, prices continue to rise, and a few individual Palestinians are the ones to profit. As one instance, land may be cited. Land, which 20 years ago cost 10 francs per dönum in the colonies, now costs 7 to 8 pounds sterling, and land which cost the same amount outside the colonies costs 3 to 5 pounds sterling. At the present moment, a room in a city in Palestine costs as much as a room in New York. As immigration progresses, prices continue to rise. Far from a basic solution being attempted, the present system encourages the evil. The task of the colonizer becomes increasingly difficult instead of increasingly lighter. 9/10 of the colonizers bring as their only capital their 2 hands and their energy, so that the Jewish people, which through the Zionist organization must find the necessary capital, will find the prospective budget of a colonizer increasing from month to month, the capital which a month ago sufficed to carry a colonizer through his period of unproductiveness, failing the following month to meet his needs. Conditions must be blamed for this, and not the individual. Industry in Palestine was not coordinated with the inside needs of the new colonization. The industrial and agricultural undertaker in Palestine was not prepared either to absorb the incoming worker or to increase his production to meet his needs. New colonizers were an uncertain element, and preparation to receive them would be an unfavorable speculation. Attempts which have been made to prepare for the new colonizer by an extension of industry have proved a failure, as witness the histories of the foundry industry, the brick and tile industry, and others. Only the importer can thrive, for making no permanent investment of capital, he follows closely the tides of consumption and rises and falls with them. The new colonizer, one individual amongst many, comes at first to increase the consumption of the country. He competes with other colonizers for the purchase of food, shelter, clothing, and the implements of his industry, purchasing his needs in retail quantities, paying retail prices, and by his presence in Palestine increases the difficulty of his own task and of the task of his fellow colonizers. These conditions are the natural result of a policy which regarded colonization as the reduplication of an infinite number of retail businesses. The high cost of these individual efforts to the Zionist organization will be seen from the annexed table, which contains the budget presented by the Zionist administration in Palestine to the London Conference in 1920. Thus, colonization sees itself retarded by its own growth. The colonizer himself becomes discouraged, and the Jewish people, faced with an ever-increasing burden, will begin to lose faith in the possibility of transferring a large portion of the Jewish people to Palestine, and Zionism, which aims at this national reconstruction, will become an absurdity. A new system of colonization is therefore called for, a system which will be able to take care of itself and which will not become entangled in the factious and complex interests which now predominate in Palestine. Such a system, aiming at the rational, efficient, and economical colonization of Palestine, is hereby submitted under the name of the unit system. Definition of the unit system. The adoption of the unit system is based on the primary consideration that colonization shall not be carried on by the settlement in the new country of a series of individuals economically unrelated. Colonization must be made by large successive bodies or units of individuals, comprising an economic entity, which shall, as far as is physically possible, achieve independence. The word independence is here used in its widest sense. It does not merely mean that the unit and the individuals of which it is composed shall be able to live by the fruits of their labor, but that efforts of the unit shall be directed towards self-establishment as a self-sustaining body, producing, as far as is possible, its own necessaries within its own organization. This is the first and most important distinction. As we have seen, plans for colonization have not hitherto dealt with a number of immigrants who shall constitute a colonizing unit, a body meeting its own needs by its own production. The custom has been to plan the settlement of individuals and small enterprises, producing very little for their own consumption, but almost entirely for outside markets. Under this system, we have seen how the small and independent undertaking has been made almost impossible, the colonizer paying from the very beginning a heavy tribute to other industries, local and foreign, both in his installation and equipment and in the meeting of his current needs. As a small retailer, he was forced to pay retail prices which were ruinous, but as a part of a large unit, which works only for itself at factory prices, he is no longer burdened with this crippling handicap. The unit system is therefore based on the rigid conception that a colonization unit must make it a primary duty to settle its individuals in the country in such wise that they shall themselves produce the necessary minimum for their own sustenance in food, clothing, and shelter. Only when these conditions shall have been met shall consideration of the production for the purposes of barter be taken into account. And the first of such surplus production shall be directed to the repayment of the cost of colonization and organization. In other words, the unit is conceived as a great industrial organization working first to support its individuals by the direct production of all the necessaries of life, and second to repay the cost of installation. That is, to repay the capital which was advanced by the Jewish people for its foundation. The system, therefore, has in view first the incalculable advantage of a Palestinian yeshub which, under the most adverse circumstances, shall at least be able to provide for its own existence, and second, the equal advantage of repayment for installation, so that colonization shall take the aspect not of a philanthropic institution, but of a healthy, self-sustaining enterprise. From the economic point of view, the fundamental principle involved in a self-sustaining unit is defensive and not aggressive. Economy of the unit system. The advantages of the unit system, reflected as they are in every stage of the colonizing problem, begin with considerations preceding the settlement of the colonizer in Palestine. The colonizing element on which the Zionist movement counts is of practically unlimited dimensions. In many parts of the Old World, the Jewish population has been practically ruined, or at least reduced, to a condition which is a ready stimulant to emigration. Unfortunately, the condition which stimulates immigration also prevents it. These Jews have neither the money nor the credit to enable them to make their homes in Palestine. There is, of course, only one source from which credit can be expected, and that is the Zionist organization. But it has been shown that on the old system of colonization, with the individual settler and individual enterprise, the call which would be made on the Zionist movement would be an impossible one. The sum needed to settle a single family in Palestine, to provide it with the necessary initial capital to set up an agricultural industry and to live until the industry pays, is a considerable one. It is, as has been shown, an uncertain sum, increasing from month to month as colonization progresses, so that even the figure which would be fixed for today for the settlement of a single family would be utterly inadequate a year hence. But even accepting that figure as fixed, when multiplied by 20,000 to represent the settlement of 100,000 souls, it becomes a sum entirely disproportionate with the results achieved. Apart from this question of means, there is the question of the individual. The individual applicant for credit is unknown to the Zionist movement. His personal reliability and his productive capacity are unknown factors. Moreover, however reliable and capable he may be, the small industrial organization, with its high expense, its meager chances of success, its tremendous initial difficulties, and its uncertain market, might easily fail in the future as it has often failed in the past, and the result would be not only discouragement of the settler and of prospective settlers, but a drain on the goodwill of the Jewish people in the colonization of Palestine. Individual credits, then, are costly and uncertain. What is needed, and what is proposed under the unit system, is the granting of what is really a mass credit to the entire unit of colonization. With this system, the chances of return are increased by the maintenance of a mortgage on the property, i.e., capital provided for the unit, and on the process by which this property or capital is exploited. This mortgage on the process means only the administration and organization of the unit to the best advantage of its members, who are the debtors, and therefore for the best advantage of the Jewish people at large, which is the creditor. Furthermore, a unit of immigration of 100,000 individuals treated as an organized and self-contained body can be financed with a credit which is infinitely smaller than the sum which would be called for the separate financing of 100,000 separate immigrants with their 20,000 separate enterprises. This advantage, coupled with the higher chances of return as outlined in the preceding paragraph, will constitute a powerful appeal for the necessary credit. End of Colonization of Palestine, the Unit System, by Boris Kazmann. Read by Claudia Caldi.